We'll start the midwife trial, and I don't know how far into it we'll get. It is very long. I do not know the details of what happened, and we will learn about it together. Just of note, there is probably 20 hours of content from the midwife trial. What I know of this case is there was a midwife. I don't know their designation as far as what kind of midwife. There are many types of midwives in the U.S. I don't know her designation. I'm sure we'll learn that. And I don't know what happened, but there was a death of a either baby who was being born or had just been born who was under her care and apparently was charged. So I think that maybe this will describe it a little bit. If we are still confused about what has happened and we get a little bit into the video, we'll go find a review video.
Judge, we're here today because of Angie Hock's arrogance. She put herself out to be a skilled midwife and led a family to make decisions that endangered their child's life. She talked in the contracts about having a training in the art and science of breech birth. In her contracts, you'll see that she tells them she's had training in routine breech presentations. The problem with this case, Judge, is you're going to hear from state's experts that are going to tell you that breech presentations are anything but routine. They're very dangerous, and they are best served in a hospital setting.
A couple of points, and I will try not to pause this too much because it is very long. Midwifery in the United States comes in many, many forms. And the problem with that is that midwife is not a title that is protected like medical doctor, where if you meet someone and they say they're a medical doctor, you know with relative certainty that unless they're lying, they've gone through 4 years of a undergrad degree, 4 years of medical school, and then presumably several years of residency training in whatever they're practicing in. Although you could technically retain the title of medical doctor without going to residency, you wouldn't be able to practice. So I think that it is concerning, and I've talked about this a little bit before. The specific midwife type that they're referring to with Angie Hock is I think, without admittedly knowing a lot about her, I think probably traditional midwifery. This is somebody who basically did an apprenticeship with somebody else who is not formally trained as a midwife. This means they have no oversight committee, like for licensing. They have no standards for training. They have no requirement as to how much they must do with regards to number of births attended and actively participated in and led as primary midwife on before they can start offering their services to patients. Another really common thing that I see as a problem in the US with home birth that is different in other countries, and I have a whole video on home versus hospital birth in the US if you want to watch it, but the people who deliver the furthest away from help are usually the people with the least amount of training, because a lot of certified nurse midwives and certified professional midwives don't want to do home births because of the problems that come along with that being less safe in the US than in other places. So this person had no formal training, I'm assuming. So claiming to be an expert in the art and science of breech birth is bananas. There is no situation where breech birth should happen outside of a hospital.
She says in the contract that if the birth moves beyond normal or the range of her expertise, she's happy to consult with other midwives, physicians, and other medical professions. This birth of Vera was way beyond.
Also, bullshit is also accurate.
But she told them she could do it. So at some point, Angie Hock told them, "You're not progressing. You need to go to the hospital." And because they trusted Angie Hock, they did what she said. Okay, we'll go to the hospital. They went to the hospital, and Sabre was born by an emergency C-section. Fast forward to then when they were pregnant with Vera. They were very pleased with Angie Hock's.
Okay, so we've learned that not only was this a breech home birth, it was a breech home birth after a prior cesarean in another pregnancy, which happened because of failure to progress at home. It's indefensible. I don't know what the outcome of this trial will be, and I don't even know what the details of what happened were, but I can tell you, just purely based on this is terrifying and should never happen. If this baby died in the process of this birth, that is predictable. If the person who was having the baby would have died in the process of this birth, it would have been predictable. This is a very bad idea to have a breech VBAC at home with a lay midwife.
There's a doula. You're going to hear from that doula. Her name is Mickey Heffley. They were being advised, Creighton will tell you when he testifies, that he was being advised to not do a vaginal birth after cesarean. It'd be safer if the birth was done in the hospital. That's not the end all. There are hospitals that will probably do a vaginal birth after C-section and allow someone to try a trial of labor after C-section.
I don't like that language sometimes people use of we will allow. I think we should tend towards a less paternalistic language when we're discussing birth, more like we would recommend for or against. But the statement she just made that implied, whether she meant to or not, that it's uncommon to recommend for VBAC. Like vaginal birth after cesarean is often the safest option for people. That it would be something that most people, again, there are exceptions, but most people would qualify for a trial of labor after cesarean.
On the evening of June 14th, around 9 o'clock, Emily's water broke. The plan was for Angela Hock to come in the morning. Of course, sometimes labors take a long time, so a decision was made that she was going to come in the morning. Sometime in the late afternoon, early evening, things started to progress further, contractions intensified, and at some point, Angela Hock decided to check. And when she checked, she says something about a cord, and also we have toes.
If this is me, and that is what I find, we are going straight. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200, $100, whatever it is that is in Monopoly. We're going straight to the operating room. This is an emergency. You cannot have cord be something that you can feel and think that this delivery is going to go well. I can state that with absolute certainty. Absolutely nobody who is trained to deliver babies would be unaware that a cord coming out with another body part is an emergency. So if they didn't handle this by immediately going to the hospital, this is a problem. Footling breech would be worrisome in and of itself because when the feet are the first thing coming through the cervix, you still have all the bigger parts of the baby left, right? So you could theoretically get dilated enough to deliver up to the head, and then you definitely have cord out because the belly button's out and it comes up this way, but the head's too big to come out because you're not fully dilated or because it just doesn't fit. And then you have compression on the umbilical cord and the baby's not getting any blood transfer. When you add on top of that a loop of cord coming out with a foot, which is much more common in a breech or especially footling breech presentation, then you have the potential for that cord to be compressed for the entirety of the labor. So yeah, let's see how she handles this. And if it's not immediately we go to the hospital and a obstetrician is waiting for us because I called them and told them what was happening, this is horrific.
Angela Hock is trying to do maneuvers to get the baby to deliver, isn't able to do that. They move her out in the hallway, and she tells Creighton to call 911. The paramedic showed up. And when they arrived, they described the baby basically hanging out from the neck down, one I think will describe to you. They have got to get her to the hospital.
For reference, even getting her to a hospital at this point would, there's fairly little chance that you are not going to end up with a dead or extremely harmed baby.
Angela Hock's kind of running the show. They don't know who she is. They don't know if she's a nurse. They don't know if there's a doctor. One of them will describe that she had some kind of uniform on, a Nebraska birthkeeper's uniform of some sort, or a T-shirt, and she wanted some trauma shears. Give me some trauma shears. EMTs are not trained to do episiotomies, but that's what Angela Hock wanted to do, and it took a couple of scissors to do it. She broke 2 scissors as she tried to cut the perineum. I'm
very confused why she would do an episiotomy at this point. The baby is not stuck because it's not coming out of the vagina. It is stuck because it's not coming out of the cervix. That is not how you manage this situation.
Vera was born shortly before they arrived at the hospital. They gave some final pushes, and Vera came out. She wasn't really breathing. They started CPR, and eventually they were able to get a heartbeat back in the hospital. This is about the defendant's arrogance. This isn't about midwifery law in Nebraska. It's not even about whether she was licensed or unlicensed. It's about the fact that she believed she knew how to deliver a breech baby.
If you truly know how to deliver a breech baby, you will also know that it is extraordinarily unsafe to deliver probably any breech baby, but for certain, a footling breech baby in a patient who has had a cesarean at home. So just by way of the fact that she thought that this was a reasonable thing to do, you can be absolutely certain that she did not know what she was doing. Because even a bad midwife would know this is a stupid idea.
The state of Nebraska is placing their failures to make childbirth safer on the shoulders of their scapegoat, Mrs. Hock, and they intend to sacrifice her. But the criminal law in Nebraska does not allow scapegoating of Angela Hock in this way. Legally, this prosecution for felony child abuse ignores several important realities. First, the agency of Emily No, her right to control where to put her own body, precludes the imposition of criminal liability on Mrs. Hock under these circumstances.
No. It does not. It absolutely does not. Okay, it does not. That would be like me saying, oh, well, I told the patient that I knew how to do a hysterectomy, but actually, I've never really, done one, or I've only done two, but I told them that I knew how, and they died while I was trying to do that because I accidentally put a trocar through their aorta. But you know what? Bodily autonomy means they made that choice to be there. No. That is not how that works. It is not how it works.
As I tell this story, I want you to focus on the different people and institutions whose actions played a role in Creighton and Emily's decision to have a home birth. Specifically, you should think about what the state of Nebraska did that forced Creighton and Emily to choose an unlicensed midwife for their home birth. You should think about the medical culture that made Creighton and Emily distrust hospital care. And you should think about the thoughtful decisions made by Creighton and Emily about the births of their children, choices that they had every right to make.
None of this makes any difference if Hock was practicing an unsafe delivery.
Vera was not Emily's first child. Evidence will show that when Creighton and Emily became pregnant with their first child, Sabra, they did what all good parents do. They educated themselves. They sought out the opinions of medical professionals to understand their options with respect to giving birth and the risks associated with those choices. They went to obstetricians who talked to them about childbirth, their options, and the risks involved. The evidence will show that they sought out prenatal care. They did everything that responsible parents do when they're expecting.
Is home birth with a licensed midwife illegal in Nebraska? That could be what they're arguing here.
And they talked through an agreement that stated their understanding was that Mrs. Hock was an unlicensed and uncertified traditional midwife. That agreement described Mrs. Hock's midwifery training, and it made it clear that Mrs. Hock would never make medical decisions for the birthing parents. Creighton and Emily chose Mrs. Hock for the primary reason that she would receive.
I can understand now a little bit more of the argument, so I want to include it here. The opening statements for the prosecutor included a statement that this is not about the law in Nebraska. And the defense attorney has now brought up the law in Nebraska. So I wanted to bring you in on what the law in Nebraska is. It is a felony in Nebraska for a certified nurse midwife to attend a home birth. It is also in Nebraska, certified nurse midwives are the only licensed midwife that is recognized. So I do think this is partially about the law in Nebraska. I don't know that that absolves this person of the fact that they practiced poor medical care here, but I do understand now why they're talking about this, because the fact that CNMs are the only midwives recognized in Nebraska and that it is a felony for them to participate in home birth would inevitably lead people to put their trust in unlicensed professionals, because licensed professionals are not allowed to provide home birth. So I am, for the record, against that being law. I Googled this person while I was trying to find this information, and I now know the outcome of this trial. I won't ruin it for y'all if you don't want me to. Let's get back to the video.
Mrs. Hock never told Creighton and Emily what to do. She respected the fact that it was Emily's body and ultimately Emily's decision whether to transfer to a hospital. Even though Sabra was safely delivered at the hospital, Emily did not come out of that experience feeling safe. Her voice was not heard, her rights to information and consent were not respected, to the point that her husband described her as being dragged off to surgery. That experience further traumatized Emily, and it deepened her aversion to seeking hospital care unless it was absolutely necessary.
Yeah, but it was absolutely necessary.
They talked with Mrs. Hock about a home birth, and she also advised a C-section for similar reasons. Later,
I don't understand. I have a hard time understanding why they would recommend a C-section and not a VBAC, particularly Wackadoodle McGee over here, who thought it was time to do a footling breech home birth after a cesarean, but apparently said, no, you should have a C-section at the beginning.
You can't be a licensed midwife in Nebraska and attend a home birth. The state has made this impossible. The practical result of this is to drive midwifery underground. Because the state refuses to regulate the practice, there is no integration of care between hospitals and traditional midwives. OBs and hospitals refuse to work with traditional midwives because they are unlicensed. Ultimately, Creighton and Emily chose to have another home birth with Mrs. Hock.
I'm not connecting the dots here. I agree that this drives home birth underground, okay? The law does do that. And I think that's not a good law to have. Yes, the audio changed. That was not me. It was on their side. But that is not what caused this. The fact that she could have said, I'm not capable, I don't think it's safe for you to have a vaginal breech birth after a cesarean at your house. And when she felt a foot and cord, she could have said immediately, we need to go to the hospital. But she didn't do those things. So I don't think that the problem, which is a real problem, of making it illegal for licensed midwives to attend home births was the problem. Because if Angela Hock had a license, this would still be the outcome.
And that meant they would have scant support from the medical community. There would be no OB on call in case there were complications at birth. There would be no ambulance equipped with the proper tools and trained personnel to transport Emily to the
There are always ambulances and OBs on call. We don't come to your house, but there is always somebody.
Emergency room and be treated by unknown doctors with no background on the situation and no relationship to her personally.
That's how it always works.
Mrs. Hock did provide accurate information, and that information was consistent with the advice given to them by their OB, Dr. McBee. Once the decision was made, Mrs. Hock accepted that decision and supported the parents and their unborn child to the best of her abilities. Tragically, complications...
Yeah, I actually think this argument works really well right up until the point where she said, that's a foot and a cord. Because at that point, it changes. I don't understand. This is silly.
Arose during the birth of Vera, and she presented in the breech position. This was not preventable. Sometimes babies present in breech, and all anyone can do is respond. In a hospital setting, OBs strongly recommend a C-section in the case of breech, but ultimately, it is the mother's decision to make. If a mother refuses a C-section, the hospital staff must assist in a vaginal birth, just like Mrs. Hock.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. But I wouldn't be going, I'm perfectly capable of doing this after I recommended a C-section. I would be saying, I definitely don't recommend this, and I am not as trained as I would like to be in this. And if at any point you decide that we should change a plan, let's change a plan. And I will keep you updated. And then when I found a cord and a foot, I would have been like, this has become next level unsafe. Are you sticking with the C-section, with the no C-section plan? And then I would be documenting the shit out of the fact that they didn't want to do that. That's not what happened here. That is not, I mean, I guess we have to take each of these at face value. We'll wait for the testimony to see what kind of counseling was happened, but.
As Creighton was packing a bag, Emily went into the restroom alone and closed the door. For the next 10 to 15 minutes that she was inside that restroom, she is the only person who knows what happened. She was quiet inside the bathroom.
Okay, I just have a hard time thinking, like, obviously this family trusted this person, and for what it's worth, they aren't the ones who filed these charges. But I have a hard time believing that if she said, this is no longer safe, we should go to the hospital, they would have said no to that, because they trust her. I want to know how much time elapsed between there's a foot and a cord and going into the bathroom and the feet being born.
When Emily and Vera arrived at the hospital, doctors and staff started to look for someone to blame. The position of the medical community in Nebraska is that all children should be born in a hospital. In the opinion of the doctors at UNMC, if Emily had gone into labor and given birth at a hospital, then Vera would still be alive today.
I think in the opinion of fairly everybody watching this, that would be the case. Certainly, if she refused a C-section at the point of cord prolapse and foot-link breech, then maybe not. But I don't think anybody's arguing that we can more safely deliver, well, okay, actually, to be fair, I can more safely deliver a baby. And actually, it is a fairly decent chance that even though it's still very dangerous, a foot-link breech baby could be born in a hospital safely. But there wouldn't have been that lag in delivery time because I know different things to do. I can use forceps. I can help get the baby out faster. Yeah, with that pause is great. Look, that dude's face is all of us.
Dr. Lessman, the OBGYN who provided care to Emily and Vera, sought out law enforcement and told them, in her opinion, this was a preventable death and that Mrs. Hock's actions were negligent. Dr. Lessman did this based on her understanding that she had a mandatory duty to report the practice of medicine without a license. The evidence will show that Dr. Lessman told law enforcement that, but for Mrs. Hock, Vera would still be alive. Dr. Lessman expressed an opinion.
Actually, Mom, that wouldn't have been the case here because she's not a licensed midwife. It's actually not illegal for her to
But
be
civil medical malpractice law is not criminal law. In criminal law, the standard by which people are judged is incredibly high because the penalties for a criminal act are much, much harsher than the penalties for medical malpractice. When an ObGyn suffers the tragic loss of a newborn under their care, they do not face criminal charges. They may be sued civilly, but they aren't handcuffed and hauled off to jail.
Yeah, that's a privilege you get when you have a license to practice the medical treatment you're providing. You know, I mean, I'm pretty sure I could be sued in criminal court if I was doing dentistry because I don't have a license to practice that.
It would not be proper to criminally charge an ObGyn based on an allegation that they failed to meet the civil standard of care their profession is judged by. But that is what the state is doing to Mrs. Hock. They are attempting to prove that she is guilty of a criminal act based on an allegation that she failed to meet a civil medical standard of care. The state charged Mrs. Hock with felony child abuse resulting in the death of a child. That crime requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt that this child would have lived if only Mrs. Hock had not acted as she did.
That's where they're going to run into an issue because I think that you can fairly easily argue from the defense's standpoint that I cannot beyond a reasonable doubt say for sure that this baby would be alive if it wasn't for Hock. Because if in a hospital, you know, I said in a hospital, this wouldn't have happened. Well, that's true, assuming that we were able to make the recommendations that were needed and the patient chose to go along with them. But I think that the defense's argument here, which will likely be a fairly effective one, is going to be that if she had refused a C-section at all points throughout the delivery up until the baby's feet were born, that there's still a good chance the baby would have died. I think it's still much more likely that it wouldn't have if she was in a hospital, even if she had refused C-section up until the point of delivery, because we still have other things that we can do and immediate neonatal care is available. But I don't think they're going to be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that that's the case.
Regardless of where they are delivered or who assisted at that delivery, there is an inherent risk of death in each and every childbirth. Charging a midwife under this child abuse statute is an aberration. The state would never think to charge an ObGyn with felony child abuse based on the facts of this case. If an ObGyn had come upon Emily as she was in labor and rendered the exact same care that Mrs. Hock provided in this case, they would not be charged. And there are very good reasons why such a charge is not appropriate.
Yeah, like I have a medical license. I wouldn't have been criminal charged, but if I had done this, like the exact same thing that she did, my license would have been taken away. There's a good comment here in the chat. I assume that anytime a baby dies under the care of an ObGyn, an investigation would take place to determine if negligence was involved. So not necessarily an investigation, almost always, especially if it was like during the birth of a seemingly healthy full-term baby, like that would probably be an internal review by whoever reviews problems that arise. Usually there's committees in hospitals for independent review. Investigation probably isn't the case, but a review probably, almost certainly that would be the case, unless it was like a very obvious reason that it happened. A felony lawsuit is the only way to investigate whether a certified midwife have performed malpractice because they don't have a governing body over the midwife. Now, I want to make a distinction here that a certified midwife is a very, very highly trained person. Okay, so certified midwife is a graduate level direct into midwife degree. And that is not what this person is. This person is an unlicensed midwife. That means they do not have any license. So if this happened under the care of a certified midwife, they would have a governing body who could review the outcome and review what happened. But you're right that this person who is unlicensed does not have that.
But the criminal justice system is not the appropriate venue to address the death of Vera No, because the child abuse statute was never intended to be applied in these circumstances. The evidence will show that Creighton and Emily were going to have a home birth, regardless of whether Mrs. Hock agreed to assist them. The evidence will show that Mrs. Hock accurately described the options and the risks.
I don't understand. I feel like, why didn't they bring this as practicing medicine without a license? Like, anyone worth their weight would say that you should only have a VBAC under the care of a licensed obstetrician or midwife, and this person is not licensed. So I think that they may have been way more likely to win the state if they had brought this as a practicing medicine without a license case.
Your Honor, before Creighton testifies, I would ask the court to consider advising him of his constitutional Fifth Amendment rights.
No. So,
Yes, Your Honor.
proceed. Go.
What do you do for a living?
I am currently serving.
Can we watch that again? He just said no. I've never seen a judge react like that.
Your Honor, before Creighton testifies, I would ask the court to consider advising him of his constitutional Fifth Amendment rights.
No. So,
Yes, Your Honor.
proceed. Go.
No, let's get on with this. You people are taking up enough of my time. I think we will wrap it up and come back to this for the next stream. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. Y'all have been great. Bye.